So, as I sit and record this voiceover, it is the evening of March 9th, and the Project Zomboid developers have just dropped a new update to the Unstable branch, version number 42.15.0. In this video, I'll go over everything you need to know about this update, including new additions, balancing changes, and the most prominent of many fixes, while leaving out all of the fluff you likely won't notice. As always, there will be a link to the full patch notes in the description if you'd like to give them a read, and we're starting off with some big changes to the preset Sandbox setting selections. Now, you're likely already familiar with the previous presets that were available for Project Zomboid, that being Apocalypse, Survivor, and Builder, which have essentially acted as difficulty selections for many years now. In this update, there has been a pretty substantial shift in how these presets will affect your game. The Apocalypse setting has remained, but instead of being the most difficult selection, it will now represent the canon story of how the outbreak actually went down in Project Zomboid's imagining of Kentucky in 1993. The developers note that core changes include removing zombie respawns, reduced impact of both muscle strain and discomfort modifiers, as well as more realistic animal growth rates, adjusted loot levels, and more. Next is Outbreak, which is essentially designed to offer an accelerated experience where you'll advance at a faster rate with much less time investment required. Extinction is now known as the hardcore experience for veteran players that are purposely looking for a challenge. The biggest change that the devs have noted here is that there will be sprinters in this preset, so be ready for a brand new level of suffering with this one. Lastly is the Rising preset, which is focused more on giving players room to explore, build, and create new things, very similar by the sounds of it to the Builder preset we used to have. Of course, custom Sandbox is still available and we'll be able to tweak any of the settings to our desires. I know to some players this may not seem like a very substantial change at all, but really, up until now, the Sandbox presets have simply been in place to offer different levels of difficulty without really focusing on how the experience could be made unique with certain specific changes. Now, these setups offer a distinctly different style of playthrough depending on your selection, and I think that's only going to serve to offer new players even more playable hours as they check out each individual setup. I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about this one actually. I know the Apocalypse, Survivor, and Builder way of doing things has been around for what seems like a very long time now, so I definitely want to hear what the community feels about this change. Let me know down in the comments. Next, we've seen some new firearms added in this update, 6 in total, featuring the JS14 rifle chambered in 5.56 by 45mm rounds, the JS3T tactical shotgun using 12 gauge shells, the L92 carbine using 357 Magnum, the L94 rifle using 30x30, the MSR7T tactical rifle using 7.52 by 51mm rounds, and lastly the Trapper carbine chambered in .45 ACP. And just because I know I'm bound to get some comments on this one, I apologize if any of that wasn't quite verbalized correctly. I am not a firearms enthusiast. Now, I've had a little play around with these myself, and I think I'm most interested by the shotgun. I just think it's nice to see a bit more flexibility in this department. I feel that most players probably just default to using the JS2000 in vanilla gameplay because it's historically been such a good weapon, but now we'll actually have some competition in that same field. Lower caliber rifles are also an interesting addition because, again, historically, the vanilla rifles in Zomboid have always made a ton of noise when fired, and these smaller caliber options may give us some long-range precision without drawing a horde to our location every time we pull the trigger. Time will tell how these fit into the current meta, but there's something to watch over the coming weeks for sure. There have been a few smaller quality of life additions made in this update, including a buff to reading speed when sitting, which I know is going to please quite a few people that like to make the most of their time management skills in solo play. There's also new animal symbols that have been added to the map interface, allowing us to properly categorize which animals we've seen rather than needing to make do with a totally different animal. For those using a controller, you'll be very pleased to hear that you're now able to use firearms on the Unstable branch. There is a note that this is very much still a work in progress, but all the same, you should now find that you have an actual aiming reticle while using guns that actively slows down as you pass over a target to allow for more precise targeting. Lastly, there are some new sound effects when interacting with small metal doors, clothing racks, and cardboard boxes. Now next in this update are the balancing changes. Not so much in this section this week, but a few things that are worth knowing about, starting off with several changes and updates to loot tables. Now there's quite a few additions in this section, but what you'll need to know as the player is that this should make for more unique and realistic finds when you're exploring. For example, a locker room may not just be a police locker room anymore. You may find that the locker room spawns specifically SWAT-related gear or specifically prison officer clothing, for example. The whole idea seems to be to create more stories told through loot distribution and offering some unique finds along the way to really give you that dopamine hit when you find something valuable, like that locker room filled with SWAT gear that I mentioned just a moment ago. Vehicle headlights now have a larger cone size, which will serve to illuminate a wider area. Likewise, pen lights have had their light cones reduced in size so they're a little bit more realistic. Now if you accidentally drive over an animal corpse in the road, which is easily done if you're at speed, it will now have less impact on your vehicle's health. This should mean that you won't immediately find your car totaled if you roll over a few dead rabbits by mistake. Tools have also seen some usage changes in this update, such as screwdrivers no longer suffering tool degradation for electrical-based recipes, and the reduction of durability drain on tools designed to chop down trees when fulfilling that very same action. The translation there is basically we should go through axes much slower when chopping down trees, which is honestly a godsend because in my humble opinion, they broke far too quickly before this change. Garden hose will now also have the ability to remove tree stumps, so you won't need to go searching for a pickaxe specifically just for this purpose. Oh, and the very last thing before we move on to some multiplayer specific stuff, you can no longer fall asleep on the toilet. Okay, so those of you playing on multiplayer servers right now are going to want to hear this particular part of the video. Firstly, several cases of both server-side and client-side errors have been fixed, as well as something that was causing frequent server crashes. I know a lot of players on our server were seeing instances of attacks passing through zombies when near vehicles or animals, which should no longer be the case as of this update, hopefully resulting in fewer frustrating deaths that were no fault of the player. Desync with player clothing has been fixed, which should mean that players will appear with the same clothing they are actually wearing to everyone else around them. The patch notes don't really specify whether this was a fix or a balancing change, but vehicles have now had their sound radius reduced in multiplayer. I'm not really sure why, but it should make things a bit easier when you're driving out on a loot run at least. Vehicle trunk capacity will also now correctly update when receiving damage, which wasn't happening properly before this update. You will no longer suffer random damage when climbing up or down escape ropes, and players should now be able to interact with composters that weren't functioning correctly in the previous version. Now we're moving on to some broader fixes now for both single player and multiplayer, and there is quite a long list here, so again, just remember I'm only covering the ones I think you'll need to know, and that the full patch notes are linked in the description if you want to see the full list. First and foremost, a security vulnerability reported by community member Copium Sourced has now been fixed across all listed versions of Project Zomboid, with the dev team's thanks also being offered. A couple of issues with zombies have been fixed, including them flipping direction before getting up when they had been ran over by a vehicle, and also jumping when taking shots from firearms. Now on the topic of firearms, two bugs have been fixed here that cause magazine reload speeds to increase when spamming the crouch button and holding Alt, drastically increasing bullet damage. Multiple issues have been resolved both when washing the character and when using soap as part of this action, so you should be able to keep your character clean without using too much water or soap from here on out. A bug causing incorrect timing for the electrical grid shutoff has now been fixed, and it should now adhere to your sandbox settings without exception as intended. Eggs will now be frozen correctly, which could have been the reason I was seeing chicks hatching in freezers up until now. And lastly, some issues around corpse sickness and gas masks have now been fixed, so you should gain the appropriate amount of sickness reduction when wearing a gas mask around zombie bodies. Before I wrap up this video, it's also worth noting that there has been a new modding changelog as well, which means that some of your mods may have been temporarily made incompatible, although it shouldn't be too long for modders to get them back up to date again. The joys of having monthly updates unfortunately means modders will have their work cut out for them on this front. Now that's it from me in this one, folks, but that's everything you should need to know about this update. And of course, I'll continue to drop future videos as we get more development news. If you'd like to give multiplayer a try for yourself, don't forget that we have both public and whitelisted Patreon-based servers available for our community. Just join our Discord using the link in the description of this video and look for the PZ server announcements channel for details. Thanks again for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.